Here we go. So, greetings, everyone. This is Gary Ali with the Narkis St Congregation Shabbat Bible Study for June 20th, 2020. And we are looking at Luke 7:31 to 35 today. And I would like to start off with prayer. And after that, I would actually like to read starting in verse 18. So I want to read from 18 to 35, a little bit of review from the last weeks, and then we will focus on our main passage of verses 31 to 35. So God, thank you for bringing us here this morning or this evening or wherever we are in the world. And thank you for your word. Thank you for each other, the community of disciples that are seeking to follow you, to listen to you, to obey you, and to do what you've called each one of us to do in these times. Help us to be faithful to the end, even to our burial, and that our hearts would show you in everything that we do. In your name we ask this, Jesus. Amen. Okay, sorry about that morbid introduction of burial, but we got inspired by Gemma, I guess. Let's read from Luke 7, and I'm going to start in verse 18. John's disciples told him about all these things. Calling two of them, he sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" When the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, 'Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?'" At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and he gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." After John's messengers left, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No. Those who wear expensive clothes and indulge in luxury are in palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, 'I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you.' I tell you, among those born of women, there is no one greater than John. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he." All the people, even the tax collectors, when they heard Jesus' words, proved God right, because they had been baptized by John. But the Pharisees and the experts in the law rejected God's purpose for themselves, because they had not been baptized by John. Jesus went on to say, "To what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to each other, 'We played the pipe for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not cry.' For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and you say, 'He has a demon.' The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, 'Here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is proved right by all her children." All right. So here we are. And the reason why I wanted to review what we've done the last couple of weeks is there's 3 questions that are brought up here in this passage that I just read from. There's 3 questions starting from the very beginning. I guess I'll open this up. What's the first question that's asked by John's disciples who are asking for John?
Who would you say that I am? No,
Yeah.
are you the one who is to come? Sorry.
Yeah. Are you the one who is to come? And this is asked to Jesus, right? What's the next question that's asked later on by Jesus, actually?
Who did you go out and see?
Who did you go out to see? And there's a whole list of questions there that kind of descend from that main question. But who did you go out into the wilderness to see? And Jesus is asking that question about who?
John the Baptist.
John. Okay. And then our question in this Bible study is, what's the question?
Whom should I compare?
Yeah.
Children of this generation to.
To what do I compare this generation of people to? What are they like? And who's this talking about?
Himself.
It's the people, right? It's the people there in Israel. So you got three questions, and they're all asking, who is this, and who are these? So they're all questions of identity. First, who is Jesus? The second one, who is John? And then this third one is, who are these people? Who are the people? The audience. I don't want to maybe get into specifics about who it is regarding Jesus asking this question about the people, but we're talking about a group here, group of people. And so this final question about the people actually involves all 3 of the characters. It involves Jesus, John, and the people. Because the people are saying about John, what do they say about John? They say he has a demon. And then what do they say about Jesus?
He's a glutton and a drunkard.
A glutton and drunkard, right. And so in this final question, it involves Jesus and John, their identities within the identity of the people of this generation. Okay, so I want to keep that kind of overall context as we now go into our specific 4 verses, starting in 31 and going into 32. How does Jesus describe the people of this generation?
Like kids.
They're like children. They're kids. And it says, we're in the marketplace. They're calling out to each other. We played the pipe for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not cry. And so, offhand, or just to start, how do you read this? One interpretation out there, anyone?
It sounds like little kids who are trying to get attention, and nothing they do gets a response.
Okay, so maybe being annoying. But what do you see with the parallelism? Where I say we played the pipe for you and you did not dance. So
the parallelism is surely that we're doing something jolly and you didn't play, you didn't dance, you didn't whatever, and then we sang a dirge, which is what you do with death, and you didn't even cry.
Okay.
You can't get it right either way. It doesn't matter what you do, you messed it up.
Right. And right. I mean, and everybody knows this, right? We were just talking about going to a funeral, and
right.
you don't go to a funeral and you don't go to most funerals and dance and party.
Right.
And you don't go to a party and cry, right? Everything fits in its time and its place. And we kind of talked about this previously, like with the whole idea of wisdom, like Ecclesiastes chapter 3, Kohelet, where it talks about for every season, every time there's a season, there's a time for war, there's a time for peace, there's a time, you know, to be happy, a time to be sad, and so on. And anyways, keep that in the back of your mind as we keep going forward here. But this specific example that Jesus gives is a well-known fable at the time.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I actually, when I read it, I kept thinking there must be a reference to it somewhere. You know, you
Have they
get.
found it? Sorry.
Yeah, it goes back to Aesop, apparently. Aesop's fables that people know about. And there's one that's called The Fisherman and His Pipe. And let me just throw this out to everyone. We all live in the world. We all live in different countries, different cultures, and there's many things that is different about us, but there's also many things that is similar to all of us. And all of our cultures like good stories. We all like good proverbs. We like teaching lessons that are passed down from grandparents to grandchildren, from teachers to students. And so this is kind of the word, it goes in all cultures is what I'm trying to get at. And things pass around, just like the coronavirus has now spread around the entire world. That is how communication and knowledge and stories, they pass from person to person, and they even are translated into other cultures. And so it's interesting, like, you know, we often talk about Jesus is Jewish, and he's not coming from a Greek culture, he's coming from a Jewish culture. But the Jewish culture, as you know, spread around the world. It went into the Greek-speaking world. That's why they had to translate the Hebrew Bible into the Septuagint before the time of Jesus, because of all the Jews that were living in the Western world that were speaking Greek. It got translated into Aramaic and the Targum, which was later, and those are all in the Eastern world. And we have today the Bible in English and Dutch and all of our languages out there. And so there are things that spread just because we're in contact with one another. And so just to give this the context of an Aesop's fable, this is what I'm going to read right here. So keep all that in mind. The Fisherman and His Pipe. There once was a fisherman who saw some fish in the sea, and he played on his pipe, expecting them to come out onto the land. When his hopes proved false, he took a net and used it instead in this way. He was able to haul in a huge catch of fish. As the fish were all leaping about, the fisherman remarked, "I say, enough of your dancing, since you refused to dance when I played my pipe for you before." So you probably notice that the fish, he was playing the pipe before, and they were dancing at the wrong time. He was trying to get them to dance out, and instead they're in the net. And obviously we know fish, when they're in nets, they all flop around. It looks like they're dancing. And it's this picture of them. Now they're caught in the net and they're dancing, but it's kind of over for them because they didn't do it at the right time. And so what's interesting about this is the Greek historian Herodotus, he wrote a history of kind of like the Greek Empire, the Greek, its heyday, its golden age. And he records about the Persian War. You remember the Persians, Iran today. Well, we can all go back to Nebuchadnezzar, right? He comes and he conquers a lot of the Middle East here, what we call the Middle East today, the ancient Near East, and included Jerusalem. And Babylon was then conquered by the Persians, okay? And Cyrus is the one who conquered Babylon. And so Herodotus, who's a few hundred years later, records about Cyrus. The Bible calls him the the Messiah, right? In Isaiah chapter 49, I think it is. Not 49, 48. Anyways, Cyrus is the one who lets the Jews come back to build the temple in Jerusalem. And we have that in Ezra and Chronicles. And so Cyrus, king of Persia, is going towards Asia Minor and towards Greece. And he's having a battle against Croesus, king of the Lydians. And he said to the Ionians and the Aeolians, these other peoples, he said, join me to fight against King of Lydia. And they didn't. They were hedging their bets to see, what's going to happen. Is the King of Lydia strong enough to hold out against Cyrus? And at the end, Cyrus conquered Lydia. And then those two would-be allies came to Cyrus and said, can we now be under you? Can we now serve you? Or can we agree to the terms that you originally gave us? And so he then quotes this fable of the fisherman and his pipe. Herodotus records that Cyrus records this fable to them, where basically he's saying they refused to listen to Cyrus when it was the time to do it, when it was time to, invest your money in the stock before it shot through the roof. And since they didn't, well, things aren't going to be as favorable as they were because they missed the time. Okay, is everybody kind of followed all of that? Okay, so here's the next thing is, what is the context? So we have this idea of there's this negativity. It's kind of like a parent talking to a kid right now. I told you to clean your room then, but you didn't do it then. And now something's happened where because you hadn't done that, there's a consequence that's come about. Okay, so this is kind of, this fable gives you that idea. But then what is the context in Luke 7 and verse 33 and 34? What's Jesus and John? What are they connected to here? What is John the Baptist not doing?
You've just had a whole thing before about those who've been baptized and basically got it, as we said last week, and the Pharisees who hadn't. And then he turns around and says, what shall I compare with this generation? And you've got the same thing. They're like kids. Some of them play the flute at the wrong time and you didn't dance, and then you sing a dirge and you didn't weep. I mean, it's like that. It's a constant. I mean, you had it at the beginning, I thought, which was this whole idea about it. You never seem to get it right. You're always at the wrong place.
Right. But who gets it right, though? Back in verse 29.
Well, it was the tax collectors and those who'd been baptized. They got it right.
Right. What's it say there?
Yeah.
Read it.
They affirm God's justice. I've got.
Okay. Other translations?
Acknowledge that God's way was right.
Nice.
It's kind of.
Anything else?
Even the tax collectors justified God having been baptized.
Yeah. So God's right. And look down in verse 35. What's it say in verse 35?
Well, then wisdom is vindicated by all her children.
Other translations?
Wisdom is justified by all her children.
Oh yeah.
Anything else?
You had wisdom is proved right by all her children.
Yeah. Yeah. So my point is both words in 35 and 29 is the same word there in the Greek. That the rightness, the righteousness, the justice. It's like it's both wisdom and God are proven right. And so this is going to tie us together in our conclusion later. But going to 33 and 34, what does it say John the Baptist is not doing?
John the Baptist is not eating and drinking and having a party.
Right. And what is Jesus doing, the Son of Man?
He is eating and drinking and being with all sorts of nasty people.
Yeah. And then look at verse 36. What happens right after this?
Pharisees ask him to eat with him.
Yeah. He's immediately invited to a dinner.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And back in March, we did a Bible study or two on, there was multiple times where Jesus is eating with people and he's accused of eating with the wrong people. And so, and this is all tied into wisdom, okay? And it's tied into children, right? So, wisdom's children, and we got these children in the market. So where do you have wisdom and children and eating and drinking? Okay. Yes, Proverbs.
I mean, Proverbs is full of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Everything is about the fear of Adonai, time and again.
So let's go and look at it. Proverbs 23. And I'm going to skip around in it. And we like to read lots of Bible here. And so hopefully no one will get drunk in the scripture because we're going to be gulping it down. But I'm going to start in Proverbs 23:1. When you sit to dine with a ruler, note well what is before you. Put a knife to your throat. And if you're given gluttony, do not crave his delicacies, for that food is deceptive. Then go to verse 6. Do not eat the food of a begrudging host. Do not crave his delicacies, for he is the kind of person who is always thinking about the cost. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the little you have eaten and will have wasted your compliments. Now, if you were to talk about these 6 verses that we've just looked at, what's the commonality for the wisdom here when it comes to eating and eating?
If you eat with the right people, they will see who you are and what you're worth. And if you're eating with the wrong people, they will despise you.
Okay, but maybe here though, what it's talking about how much you eat. Like is the judgment. Sorry, don't be a glutton.
It says don't be a glutton. Son of Man has come eating and drinking. You say, look, a glutton and a drunkard.
So the way people are judging you is the quantity or the way you do it, right? It's kind of classic mismanners type of stuff. Let's keep going. Go to verse 19 now. Listen, my son. Okay, so here's a kid, here's a child, or here's a disciple. Son is a term that you can use for all of these. Listen, my son, and be wise. Okay, here's wisdom. Set your heart on the right path. Remember we talked about God's path was right back in Luke 7. Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves on meat. Okay, so we've already kind of had that from those other verses. And then it says, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags. And so here's the term where Jesus is accused of being, what is it, a glutton and a drunkard? I think it is. Right? It's that order, glutton and a drunkard. Yeah. Those are the same words here that you have in Proverbs 23. So let me put this out here. First off, we said, don't eat and drink a lot. That's what the wisdom is saying. Now we get to verse 19 to 25. Oh, did we read 25? Let's see. And Richard brought up about like who you actually sit and eat and drink with is also, you know, even if you don't get drunk, but the people you're sitting with are getting drunk, it looks bad on you as well. Okay. And then it's saying because they become poor, drowsiness clothes them in rags. And Jesus, the Son of Man, he's eating and drinking, and they're calling him a glutton and a drunkard. He's not rich. He's going from house to house, basically begging for food. I mean, you know, people might call him that because he doesn't have a job in the sense of, if you understand what I'm saying. It even says in Luke 8 that there are women who are providing financially for their group. We'll be looking at that maybe even next week. So there could be this thing where, you know, people throw out a stereotype. Listen to verse 22. Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old. Buy the truth and do not sell it. Wisdom, instruction, and insight as well. The father of a righteous child has great joy. A man who fathers a wise son rejoices in him. May your father and mother rejoice. May she who gave you birth be joyful. Okay. So what is the kind of son that would make a father and a mother joyful? Based off of what we've been reading.
John the Baptist. No.
Okay, on one hand,
not Jesus. I didn't hear like that.
right. On one hand, it's true because he's not a glutton. I mean, he's not eating a lot or drinking a lot.
The one who walks in his father's ways.
Sorry?
The one who walks in his father's ways.
That's good.
Okay, but in this context is basically don't embarrass your parents by who you hang out with and by what you eat and drink or the amount.
Isn't the clue in 35, wisdom is vindicated by her children, and in Proverbs, acquire truth and don't sell it, verse 23, acquire wisdom, instruction, and then we've got the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this child who's going to please the parent. It can eat and it can drink and it can enjoy itself, but at root, it doesn't despise its parent. It acquires truth. It doesn't push it away. It doesn't tell the parent to get lost. It acquires wisdom, and the only way to acquire wisdom is through the fear of the Lord.
Yeah. And I just want to point out back in chapter 7 of Luke, it says the Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say here's a glutton and drunkard, a friend of who?
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors and sinners.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it's hanging on this idea. Jesus is hanging out with tax collectors and sinners. Going back to Proverbs 23, the company you keep is how people stereotype you. And so, you know, Jesus might not have never touched wine in his life or whatever, but he's being put in this category of these types of people. And so,
Gary, I have a question on 23 and 8. It kind of intrigues me here. So you're eating all this food and you've eaten and you will vomit it up, and your complimentary words will be wasted. So evidently there's a lot of back patting here, building somebody up, and so to no avail. It'll eventually come back to you that being in this setting with this eating and drinking isn't profitable, because your complimentary words will be wasted, in my translation. So we've all been at parties. I haven't say, I want to go see the host. I want to talk to him, back slapping, complimentary words. This is great. When really we don't mean that. So too much alcohol and food makes us do things we don't want to.
Right.
But the clue is what you said just now about you are stereotyped by the company you keep, and that can be true, just as true for us. And I guess the message is that it's that your wisdom is proved by we have to prove. Let us suppose we are the children. We have to prove our
you demonstrate what you are. I mean, as Jesus says, you will know them by their fruit.
Right.
And it says wisdom is proved by her children, but in Matthew's version of this same story, it says wisdom is proved by her what?
I looked it up.
It's Matthew 11:19. It says wisdom is proved by her works.
Oh, so we're back at fruit, right?
Interesting.
That would be Banui, like Bene, Banui, the same letters without the consonant, the Nikud.
I mean, that would be more midrashic maybe, but right. Banim and Bonim, builders and sons, and there is something that you could play with maybe there thematically. But,
Gary.
Yes.
Gary, did the Pharisees have a problem with Nazarite vows? Because John had taken vows not to drink, and yet they seem to be mocking him because of the vows he's taken. Do they not respect that?
They didn't get baptized.
Yeah, I don't think they had a problem with Nazarite vows, because it was a very common thing. You see Paul doing it in Acts, and he was a Pharisee, and so
it seems strange that they would be insulting him by saying he's got a demon if they acknowledge the fact he's taken a vow before God.
Right. I think that's probably just a common put down, because they also said Jesus had a demon, right? Like when he cast out the mute spirit, and they said, Beelzebub did that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think it's kind of just a way to just you make fun of someone if you don't agree with them. You don't actually deal with the real issues.
Both of them are speaking prophetically, like they got a word from God, and they're like, no, you didn't get that word from God. You got it from demons.
Right.
It's pushback on their authority.
Yeah, you try to put down the other side without actually dealing with the issues.
But isn't it linked in some way with the deeds or the fruit in some way? Because what you mock, I mean, to go back to Rod's question, it's not necessarily the Nazarite vow that he gave. He came not eating and drinking, and yet, people's lives are changed.
Yes.
And now Yeshua comes, and he's eating with everybody. He's eating with these lousy people who are the offscouring of the earth. They're on the margins of society, and people's lives are also changed, and people are getting healed.
Yes.
And that's whatever. I mean, and so he's got to. So it's like a demon is. I mean, if it's not there are real demons around, but if in this case it's a real put down of what God is doing.
Right. Well, again, as we go back to those two verses, right? God is proved right, and wisdom is proved right. If people would stop looking at other people and demonizing them, and actually deal with what is wisdom and what is God doing, it's a spiritual battle. It's not flesh and blood, as Paul talks about in Ephesians 6. So
when we talk about joining the right group just before, what strikes me is that Jesus has no problem to eat with a Pharisee. He eats with everybody.
Yes.
He gives everybody an opportunity to discover the kingdom by joining in a meal, having a conversation. It's his style of spreading the good word.
Yes.
It doesn't turn him down, right?
So this is one thing that I want to say about Jesus. What does Jesus demonstrate when it comes to wisdom, or God's wisdom? Is wisdom is often about interpretation. it's easy to stereotype somebody and say, like, for instance, if a car is speeding and you can be like, oh, that sinner, they're breaking the law, da da da. But then you find out that the man's wife was in labor to go to the hospital, and that's why he was speeding. If you don't have the full context to make, a fair interpretation of the situation, I think this is part of what Jesus, like you just said about him eating with Pharisees and with sinners. He's not waving one flag or the other flag. He's waving God's flag or wisdom's flag. And so all of this to say, Jesus, I think, is being stereotyped. Okay, he's being called a glutton and a drunk, and Proverbs 23 kind of has this situation here where you could see someone interpreting Proverbs 23 and saying, that's Jesus. He's one of those kind of people. But here's the interesting thing. Where is this son who's a drunk and a glutton? Where is it coming from originally in the Bible before Proverbs? And I kind of made a joke about it a month or two ago.
Deuteronomy 21.
Yes. So go to Deuteronomy 21. Deuteronomy 21. And because of time, I'm just going to keep reading. Deuteronomy 21, verse 18. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Okay, so there it is. Glutton and a drunkard. It's the same terms there in Hebrew that we have in Proverbs 23. And obviously it's got to be where it's coming from when Jesus is talking as well. Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and be afraid. And so we have a son, and he's a glutton and a drunkard. But why is he a glutton and a drunkard? What is it about his character that's so bad?
Oh, he's rebelling against his parents.
Yes.
Because you honor your father and mother, that your days might be long in the land that the Lord's given you. I mean, it's...
Yes.
Wow.
It says that he is stubborn and rebellious, and it says that he will not do what?
Listen.
Will not follow.
He won't listen, which we all know in Hebrew means obey, right? And so this stubborn and rebellious only appears a couple times in the Bible besides here. It appears in a psalm, but well, actually, let's just go there. One of the few places it appears is in Psalm 78. So let's go to Psalm 78. Verse 1. My people, hear my teaching. Listen to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things from of old. Things we have heard and known, things our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers to teach their children. This is a similar thing of Proverbs, parents teaching the children. So the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. Then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds. Okay, these are like the works of the Lord, but would keep his commands. Verse 8, this is the key verse. Psalm 78, verse 8. They would not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation. Okay, so there's that phrase, stubborn and rebellious, that we had in Deuteronomy 21, talking about the son who was a drunkard and a glutton, which goes back to Proverbs 23, and it goes back to Jesus. And on top of that, the bonus is we have a generation in here. How does that relate back to Luke 7?
Because you're a generation.
This generation.
This is the generation.
This
Wow.
generation are like these children. And who are these children that we're talking about here in Psalm 78?
They're the stubborn and rebellious ones, the ones that don't listen, whose spirit was not loyal to God.
Yes, it keeps going here. Listen to this. They forgot what he had done, the wonders he had shown them. He did miracles in the sight of their fathers in the land of Egypt, in the region of Zone. He divided the sea. He led them through. He made the water stand up like a wall. So this is the generation in the wilderness, right?
Had seen God do miracles, kind of like what we're just talking about.
In Luke 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Psalm 78. Verse 17, but they continue to sin against him, rebelling in the wilderness against the Most High. Look in verse 32. After, giving all of these things that God had done and they had seen, it says, in spite of all this, verse 32, they kept on sinning. In spite of his wonders, the miracles, they did not believe.
And if you go back, they put God to the test in their hearts by demanding food for their craving. It's the same, we're back at overeating. The other thing I noticed as you were reading, and you missed, before you started in 12, he did these miracles in front of their fathers. They forgot before in 10, I'm sorry. They did not keep God's covenant and refused to walk in his Torah. So you're back again at the disobedience, the rebellious son that is disobedient and won't listen.
Yep.
And won't obey.
Yep. So when Jesus says this generation is like these children, or like children, you have this immediate connection back to the generation that was lost in the wilderness, and that we all know from Numbers and Exodus and Deuteronomy. And you can go find this in a few places there as well. I'll give you another example. If you look at Psalm 106, verse 7, regarding the rebellion, because we've been talking about a rebellious generation. Psalm 106:7 says, when our fathers were in Egypt, they did not consider. What do your translations have there? Your miracles.
You did not ponder your wonders, I've got.
Ponder.
Nor did they remember your abundant loving kindness.
Okay. Anybody else?
Our ancestors in Egypt failed to grasp the meaning of your wonders. They didn't keep in mind your great deeds of grace.
Okay. So what I'm trying to focus on here is the ponder word. Ponder, failed to grasp. Anybody else have something in the translation?
It says did not appreciate.
Appreciate.
Okay.
Okay. In the Hebrew, it says lo hiskilu, which the maskil it's a word often in Proverbs, and it's often associated with wisdom, and it's sometimes translated to understand, but in a wisdom sense.
Maskira, I mean to know.
No, skill with the lamed at the end.
So spell it in Hebrew for me.
Talking about maskil?
Yeah, just spell the word.
Yeah, mem,
Yeah.
sin,
Yeah.
kaf, yud, lamed.
Lamed. Okay. Maskil, thanks.
Yeah. And so it's interesting here, right? Because we just read in Psalm 78, it says they saw all these wonders and these miracles, and they're right in front of their eyes. But then it says they don't believe, they sin. It has all this stuff. And Psalm 106 is interpreting this as, you can see all of these miracles and these wonders, but if you don't have the eyes to see and the heart to take it in for what it really is, because I've even heard stories there people have been healed in our generation who then later turn from the Lord, and they forget for whatever reason.
Isn't this a throwback to Jesus' message back to John the Baptist, the blind see? I mean, we spent a lot of time on your spiritual eyes being open. It's not just that the blind saw. It's beginning to see what's in front of you. It's beginning to really fathom what's happened instead of pushing it away. I mean, we wouldn't talk about demons, but we just say it's, oh, well, it's luck. You know, you were lucky that such a terrible thing. We don't talk about demons in general chatter now.
Right. It's a rationalization.
Yeah, that's the word.
So I want to go to one more place where the generation is kind of brings all of this home for us today. Go to Deuteronomy 32.
Okay.
Moses is going to sing a song and for the people as they're finishing up the wilderness. And it's more like a dirge in a sense, if you read the whole chapter, which we don't have time to do, but you can read it. Deuteronomy 32. And I'm just going to start. Listen, you heavens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. Okay, the rock. Sur. His works are perfect. Okay, there's the works. And all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong. Upright and just is he. And so this is here, again, this idea of God is proven right. God's justice. It's all kind of laid out right there. Verse 5. They are corrupt and not his children. Okay, so here's some children. To their shame, they are a warped and crooked generation. And we all know who he's talking about here, because as you go on, it fills in the cracks of this generation. Is this the way you repay the Lord, you foolish and unwise people? And so here's the word wise, chacham, and foolish, naval. And it's, so there you go. You've got your wise, your foolish, which reminds us back in Proverbs, reminds us of wisdom teaching. And he says, is this how you repay the Lord, you foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father, your creator? He has made you and established you. Okay, God's got two titles here. What are they?
Rock and Redeemer? No.
Okay, rock and Redeemer, right. But in this verse 6, what are the two here?
I've got it in Hebrew, Elion.
Okay.
When the Elion gave nations.
Your father.
Father and
Creator.
And creator.
Or establisher. Yeah. Okay.
Right. The
6 for father, yes. I've got Elion in 8, sorry.
Okay.
And so what does a father produce?
Children.
Children. What's a creator produce?
The world.
Creature.
When you make something, what do you call it?
Works.
It's a work. It's a work, right?
Okay.
It's a work of art. It's a masterpiece, whatever you want to call it. But you've got, so it kind of reminds us back to Luke and Matthew. Wisdom is proved right by her children, and wisdom is proved right by her works. They're synonymous. This children are a work. let's keep going. And your
Gary,
works are children.
just go back a second. I've got the Father produces children.
And the
Who is it
creator,
that produces the creator?
Yeah.
Creator produces work.
Yeah. Okay. Verse 7, Deuteronomy 32. Remember the ancient days, bear in mind the years of past generations. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. Skip down to verse 20, Deuteronomy 32. The Lord is talking about he's despising his sons and daughters because they've upset him. In verse 20, he says, I will reject them. I will see what will happen to them, for they are a perverse generation. Children who show no loyalty, who are not faithful.
Mine reads very differently, but it's the same, but I love yours. I will hide my face from them. I want to see their hereafter, for they're an upside down generation, children with no faithfulness in them.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yes, and I like that translation, upside down generation, because that's what it is in the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Is it? Interesting.
So all of this to say that the connection with the Psalm 78 and the Deuteronomy 32, we're dealing with a rebellious and stubborn generation. And here we have this kind of perverse, adulterous generation. They are children who have been unfaithful to the Lord. And Jesus, back in the Gospels, multiple times talks about you evil and adulterous generation. Like we won't look it up, but I'll just give you a couple examples. Matthew 12, 39, 45. And there's parallels there in Matthew 16, 4, and Matthew 17, 17, and Mark 8, 38. And there's other places too, but you can go watch the video and write them down if you missed them, or I can give them to you later. But there's definitely this theme about this generation is not just a generic term that Jesus is using, like the Son of Man. When Jesus talks about the Son of Man, it is a generic term if you're using it on a day-to-day basis. But I would say most of the time in the Gospels, when you're talking about the Son of Man, it's a specific term referring back to Daniel 7. And I would say the same thing when Jesus talks about this generation. He's not talking about, well, just you guys out there. He's referring back to what we all read. The children in the wilderness not obeying their father, not listening to their father.
But can you understand by using the term generation in the Gospels in this manner, that Jesus expected to be rejected as Messiah then already?
Sure.
Or that at least they didn't understand him.
Yeah, I mean, or he could basically see that. I mean, people in general are fickle. Politicians might think that they have the heart of the people, but you've only got the heart of the people if you are a dictator and you crush the people. But in general, any type of populist movement it kind of changes with the wind, and so that's So let me bring all this together here for the conclusion. We've talked about wisdom, and we read about the works of the Messiah, these like 6 miracles from a couple weeks ago. And it's interesting, if you go and you look at Matthew 13, Matthew 13, verse 54. It says in verse 53, when Jesus had finished these parables, he moved on from there, and coming to his hometown, he began teaching the people in their synagogue, and they were amazed. Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? And there's a parallel in Mark that's the same idea. But often people don't think of wisdom and miraculous power as going together. But if we go back to our wilderness readings that we saw in Psalm 78 and Deuteronomy 32, you see the miracles and the wonders going on, but it requires wisdom to understand them or to appreciate them.
Interesting. Interesting.
It's like a fine wine, right?
Hello.
Can we just, I'm getting your overall points. Can we roll them all together with all of kind of the conversation that started with John? I mean, is this all kind of all in there? Maybe you're going to do that later, but it seems somehow, and maybe you're going to, is that John's question, the thing that struck me is that you know, John has a certain expectation of how the scriptures should be interpreted and how they should be fulfilled. And Jesus is saying the scriptures are being fulfilled in a very different way than you think, John. And then people say, and then the people who followed John, they justified God. I'm wondering if is there a sense of that, I guess that they saw that Jesus's theological approach was sound, and that I'm trying to just kind of knit it together with what you're saying.
Okay, well, so let's bring it all together here, right? Let's go back to our reading there in Luke 7:31. Jesus went on to say, to what then can I compare the people of this generation? What are they like? And they're like children. And he quotes this fable, this parable, this proverb of these children, which is a known parable for people making the wrong choices at the wrong time. When you should be dancing, you're not dancing. When you should be crying, you're not crying. And then they go on to basically, talk about John the Baptist and Jesus, as I think Gemma pointed out earlier. You cannot please them. This generation, it's a stereotype. Those kind of people, they'll never be satisfied with whether you cut your hair short or you grow your hair long or you dress this way or that way. We all know there's people in our lives who are never satisfied, and they'll always complain. And we can be those kind of people as well. I mean, that's kind of what Jesus is saying here. And so this generation is never satisfied. It can't be pleased. And so I would define that as this generation, according to Jesus, does not have wisdom.
Yeah, good.
And what is wisdom, which we've kind of been talking about over the months or the weeks, is wisdom is obeying God. Wisdom is knowing how to hear the Lord, discern his teaching, and to do it. Right? So we've been kind of going over this over and over. And John and Jesus in both situations are doing God's will. Right? I know there's the thing about, well, John, you're not quite catching it. I'm the Messiah, and you're going to have to get your head cut off. But I would kind of, in this scenario, I would leave it as John did his job. He fasted. He took it for the team. He was out in the wilderness getting a sunburn. And Jesus was doing his part, which was among the people, among the people who had suspect characters, who maybe were drunkards, maybe they were gluttons. They had prostitutes, tax collectors, people who are stealing money. He was hanging out with Democrats and with Republicans. And for those Americans out there, and in all of that, what's important is wisdom. Wisdom is proven right by her children. And her children are both John and Jesus in this case. They're both her children. They're both doing what they're supposed to do. And it doesn't look the same, right? Often we have this idea that this is the only way that God's going to work. He's going to work through these people at this time, doing this thing with their hands or their money or whatever it is. But God is working, the kingdom of heaven and all the parables that Jesus teaches on is it's spreading, it's spreading like a virus. It's like he uses the term yeast, but it's spreading and it's invisible. And at times you cannot necessarily discern it. And so wisdom is the key here. What is the fitting thing? What is the thing that God is doing? Do that and get on that right now. Don't wait, and don't wait to see what other people are doing. If you know God is going in a direction, wisdom, her children follow her and they obey God's word. And they are not, they're not kind of stuck with, I guess, blindness, with all of these things that we associate with not being in touch with the Holy Spirit. So here's my final point. This is my last statement. Just like I said at the beginning, Ecclesiastes 3, in the wisdom tradition, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. And I would say it's the same thing from the kingdom of heaven. There's a time for what God's doing in your life right now. You might be young, you might be old, you might be middle-aged, you might be a child, you might be ready to die. But there's a time for that, and there's a season for that, and it's all within God's plan. And what's important is to be in tune with what God's doing and not push against it. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to tell the people, which he's telling us, the generation, is if God is saying go into that land, even if there's giants there, you go into that land. And you'll also remember the story when the spies came back and the 10 said, no, we can't do it. And then Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can. And then God rejected them and said, well, now you're going to stay in the wilderness forever. Then what did the people do? They tried to go into the land, right? So it's very similar to this, like we played the pipe and you weren't dancing. Then we played a dirge and you weren't crying. And the same thing with the children in the wilderness, the children of Israel in the wilderness is, God said, go in. They said, no. And then God said, okay, stay. And they said, no, we'll go. And this is the problem, right? It's not discerning what's the right thing to do in God's wisdom. So that's it.
You find in, of course, both Numbers and Deuteronomy, the Lord heard your words and was angry, and he swore, not one of the men of this evil generation, and that's a common wicked generation. And it's like those folks that made them stay for 40 years is kind of the stereotypical evil generation that that when you're talking about, like, Son of Man is specific and evil generation is kind of specific.
Very much.
There. Interesting. Cool.
Isn't there an old Irish saying which is go with God? That seems to be what we're saying. I mean, let's go with God, whatever that means for any one of us.
It's good.
There's a song that's called Go with God, but Go.
That's it. There's a, where is a parable or just a short teaching by Jesus where he talks about a man had two sons, and one said he would go do his father's will but didn't, and then the other said no but he did. It kind of fits together with this. I'm not sure where it is.
It's I think Matthew 21 or something.
Sounds very much like this theme. Two sons, one is the obedient one and one is the not obedient son. Yes. And it's, I say to you, it's 21. A man had two sons, went to the first and said, son, go and work in the vineyard today. And he answered, I will not. But afterward he changed his mind and went to the other son and said the same. And he answered, I go, sir, but didn't go. Which of the two did the will of his father? And they said the first. Truly I say to you, the tax collectors and prostitutes go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and you did not believe him, but the tax collectors and prostitutes believed him. So yeah, all those motifs just came up.
We've not seen the John thing before either.
Now we got John in there too. Interesting.
That's right, great. Well done.